This is how we do it.
Olito, Chimichukma, Yakoki, Shata, Ohoyo, Apihuma, Thea. Greetings to you. I am Nura Sunlight.
Olito, Chimichukma, Yakoki, Shata, Hatak, Apihuma, Siya. Greetings to you. I am Victor Burning Fire.
We thank you for joining us.
As usual, we will use the animated voice for clarity and better comprehension. Part 2: How to trace bloodline, embracing our indigenous cultures, and avoiding colonial nation-states. Quick review of Part 1 video. Step 1 of 4 steps: learn who you are and where your kindred originated from, meaning where you originate in connection with the land, meaning identity being indigenous, and aboriginal, meaning the first inhabitants of this land, now called America, because the land is the core and root of being indigenous to this particular place on this soil of Mother Earth. Our being indigenous is place-based. When colonizers invaded and stole the land from under us, they destroyed our ways of life, and prevented us from living the way we intended. Instead, they forced us to assimilate into their way, that they call civilized. It is vital for indigenous to suppress the need and avoid directing our energies towards nation-state forming, which is merely a legal fiction, and a part of the already colonial empire building that brought the colonizers to our lands in the first place. The tribal nation is a race of people, large group of people with common ancestry and language. The state is not. It is a fiction and formed by colonization, and can only operate having citizen subjects living in fear and complacency. Nation-states, being part of empire, is based on shedding blood and environmental destruction. The unnatural nation-state cannot survive over time without support of its citizen subjects, consent to its false legitimacy. I have learned to avoid state-centered forums like the United Nations regarding how to define self-determination. Self-determination is taken, not negotiated.
A tribe is made up of clans coming together of the same race, meaning or people descended from a common ancestor, in kind, meaning nature, under group loyalty. Therefore, if the clans collectively lack loyalty and or being not of the same race, descent, kind, or nature, then there's no tribe.
You will hear people say things like, you don't have to be prepared for the colonizers' collapse. You don't have to learn your indigenous tongue that was once handed down by our ancestors before assimilation/civilization, or the forgotten cultures of our ancestors, or even giving yourself your own indigenous names, and relearning our indigenous tongues. I listened to this very boisterous and arrogant woman say these things on YouTube, and asserted that the people's culture was hip-hop. In reality, our diverse cultures derived from our sense of cultivation, meaning special attention or study to the development of the knowledge that our ancestors had through instruction, systematic improvement and refinement of the indigenous mind, our languages for one, and from collective beneficial customs and achievements of our people. The lack of diversity, and numerous limitations of hip-hop as an only culture of the colonized mind, that started in the 1900s, is not that. Far from it. And we must be prepared in advance with at least the basics for access to water, food, and camping equipment, which is vital in survival situations. No different when our ancestors prepared in advance for winter to have access to water, and stock up on food and supplies. Also, culture means the raising of a plant or crops, so we must relearn all we can about edible plants to avoid poisonous plants in our particular territories, which is a part of preparedness, and not being dependent on the colonizers' grocery stores to supply us. Our ancestors realized the bountifulness of the sea, rivers, and springs. They caught fish, hunted, gathered wild fruits, berries, nuts, and farmed organically grown fruits and vegetables for food, and didn't consider artificial and unnatural forms of subsistence to consume as a food, like today's chemically laced packaged foods and bioengineered substances that the colonizers call food. However, the colonized mind will tell you that you don't have to do this. They will refuse to relearn, and tell others to do the same. People like this will be dependent on the colonizer government's collapsing courts and programs, and will tell you to find your identity by being recognized by the colonizing oppressors with their paperwork, in their courtrooms, like the Moors always advocate, since they are colonizers themselves. So, the methods used by true indigenous to regain what was stolen will not make much sense to some people, but recognition-seeking people will ultimately realize their waste of energy, time, and finances. Aboriginal indigenous people have the power, strength, and the intellect to develop decolonization strategies to pursue our own means of liberation, and regain our indigenous languages and reconnect to our homeland and waters by immersing ourselves in our own unique societies, cultures, and intricate art forms, which are far more interrelated and diverse than just the substantially limited hip-hop subculture. Decolonization involves relearning our indigenous tongues while simultaneously navigating through colonial institutions and dropping colonial self-defeating vocabulary that was uncritically adopted by indigenous people, meaning the use of the foreign English language that originated in England. Regaining our identity involves our grown-ups and children being taught cultural, spiritual, and physical skills that served our ancestors, and how the indigenous can return to the land in many different ways. Example, our extensive traditions of loyalty to our indigenous clans, tribes, and unions. Taught critical thinking skills and decolonization, midwifery, natural remedy medicine derived from plants and roots, that the colonizers discourage, and steal to profit for themselves. Taught healthy eating, gardening, harvesting, hunting, fishing, and self-sufficiency. Just one of the indigenous qualities that I identify with and love about Saw, Hatak, meaning my husband, Victor Burning Fire, Ile O'Shady, is that he is a hunter, fisherman, and he truly helped protect and save lives as a fireman. Our ancestors hunted, fished, discerned edible plants and gathered fresh vegetation from the earth, also grew food. In Part 1, we also spoke about protection in discerning informants among you. To go even farther on protection, is basic rights of self-defense to protect ourselves, our homeland, and the means to do so. Our ancestors were never without weapons to defend themselves because they had to be prepared for outside aggression. So many indigenous people today are senselessly gunned down by the foreign colonizers because they were not trained in self-defense. We have indigenous people that teach self-defense, safe and effective handling of defensive weapons. Before beginning the How to Trace Family Bloodline section of this video, it must be said. Let the naysayers fall by the wayside of the oppressors' foreign courtrooms and such, waiting to be recognized by them, because to succeed, we must focus on our indigenous people having truly indigenous minds, and the will to go forward. Women, men, youth and elders, we must hold each other up, especially the women that birthed the male and female children, organized and managed our indigenous societies when the men were the face and voice of the clan, tribe, and tribal unions. They were the strength of our defense, and absent for days at a time to fish, hunt, and gather. This is man and woman decolonizing of gender and resurrecting the natural balance. Nation-state fictions cannot do that. Same gender trying to mate is unnatural, and will never reproduce natural life. Same gender relations can only delve even deeper into the unnatural to try and reproduce, or bring into existence what is yet unnatural. All of this means that the true indigenous to this land must stay clear of any divisive state-centered, nation-state forming or politics. Period. We must regain my own diverse cultures and traditions of whatever indigenous, clan, tribe, and/or union of Aboriginal indigenous people of this land. And act on it. The time for hours-long YouTube talks and social media talking is over. We must act now. If I am determined to live the free as we were born to do, instead of focusing on the foreign state, we must rise by strengthening our relations and alliances with other indigenous tribes to form new indigenous unity by reasserting our responsibilities, not rights. Instead of going to their courts, calling yourself Indian in accord with the colonizers' agenda, we must remind the colonizers whose land they are visiting. Ancestor Kayadahi, meaning first to kill, also known as Old Tassel, of the Ta'alegi Nation, which is the politically foreign integrated Cherokee Nation of today. Old Tassel spoke in 1777 with colonizer nation-state called United States Treaty Negotiators. The word Indian will be replaced with Ta'alegi, and God will be replaced with Great Spirit. Quote, "You marched into our towns, they were left to your mercy. You killed a few scattered and defenseless individuals, spread fire and desolation wherever you pleased, and returned again to your own settlements. Were we to inquire by what law or authority you set up a claim, I answer, none. Your laws extend not into our country, nor ever did. You talk of the law of nature and the law of nations, and they are both against you. Indeed, much has been advanced on the want of, what you term, civilization among the Ta'alegi, and many proposals have been made to us to adopt your laws, your religion, your manners, and your customs. But, we confess, we do not yet see the propriety or practicability of such a reformation, and should be better pleased with beholding the good effects of these doctrines on your own practice, than with hearing you talk about them, or reading your papers to us upon such subjects. The Great Spirit of nature has placed us in different situations. It is true that He has endowed you with many super advantages. But He had not created us to be your slaves." End quote. Taake Alfred is an author, educator and activist, said, quote, "The message from traditional teachings and from academic research is consistent and clear. Return to the land and relearn how to live as indigenous people according to the original teachings that sustained people and the earth for thousands of years." End quote. Steve Biko, indigenous to the land called Africa, and revolutionary against South Africa's struggle against apartheid, said, quote, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." End quote. This is obviously true. We must engage in lifestyles that contribute to the advancement, empowerment, and liberation of indigenous people of this land. We must focus on restoration by consciously living as liberated people while still navigating through the oppressive conditions of this colonial social life, thus restoring our thinking and our cultural values. So, in the meantime, while tracing our family trees, we encourage everyone to work on their own cultural traditions to develop words in their own indigenous language from both colonization and decolonization. Example: replacing self-defeating words with self-determining words in the colonized tongue of English that originated in England. Question: when drawing on your own indigenous tongue, do you know a word or words that relate to being free, governance, or being a leader? If not, call a relative or language speaker who does and make sure you provide them with an offering, even if they do not ask, simply for their time. And start learning words in your indigenous language. Question: would your ancestors recognize you as indigenous? Will future generations recognize you as indigenous? Tracing. This step 2 involves how to trace our kindred bloodline on both mother's and father's side as far back as we can go. And to find out where our tribes were, and what so-called treaty contract that our ancestors supposedly put an X mark on, while tracing genealogy to get history behind your ancestral tribes. Ask kindred members for information that you don't know. Get the main concentration of kinfolk in the area where lived for generations, and building historical records. Research the tribes that inhabited the particular area now called towns, cities, counties, where kinfolk lived for generations. Before we start our sample to trace our clan's bloodline. 1. Get as many details about your mother and father. Name, birth date, birthplace, and your grandmothers and fathers on both sides. 2. Sign up with a genealogy company like Ancestry.com that offers a 14-day free trial. After that, you can decide if you can pay the monthly charge. If you cannot afford that, you can sign up with Family Search Genealogy Organization for free. To do that, go online in Google and enter the name of the website. And log on using the username and password you typed in when you signed up. www.ancestry.com, www.familysearch.org. 3. We will use FamilySearch.org to do a sample search of Michael King Jr., which was the name Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother gave him when he was born. To do a search by someone's name, just type the first name and last name they were born as, the place where they lived or possibly lived, and the date, or approximate date that they were born, or the date they passed away. And click on the word search. Michael was born in 1929, and died in 1968, and lived in Atlanta, Georgia. The second record found is Michael King Jr. with the same birth and death dates, so we scroll down the page for more information on this Michael, and find his parents and his wife which matches. And click on his name of Michael, which displays the Martin Luther King Jr. that we know. This is when you save the record that matches your bloodline kinfolk. So, when you have the information of your kinfolk, you will know if it is them because it matches, and if you get stuck, that when you go back to your relatives and ask questions. You might have a family member that has already started a family tree, and within these search engines, you can look at the online census records that lists everyone in the household, their dates of birth, the state where they and their mother and father lived. You can use census records to get names of parents, if you only have a match on a child, and vice versa, and you can create your family tree with these genealogy search engines. To find unknown ancestors, start by searching for records for your oldest known relatives. If this is your grandmother, for example, search for records with your grandmother's name in them. When you find records where she appears, save the record to your tree, and add any new information from the record, like her place of birth or marriage date, to your tree. When you find records for your grandmother that mention her parents or siblings, add them as new people to your tree. Census records can be especially useful for finding someone's immediate family members. Once you've found your grandmother's parents' names and added them to your tree, start searching for records for each of her parents, keeping an eye out for records that include their siblings and parents. By working your way backward in time like this, you can often find older and older ancestors. If you get stuck moving backwards in time, try expanding your tree horizontally until you find information about the next generation back. You can do this by searching for records for the sibling, the oldest ancestor you found, then looking through the siblings' records to find their parents. While tracing your genealogy, you will find an abundance of history based on the territories that your kinfolk inhabited for untold generations, now called towns and counties. Since the colonizers classified us as Indians, do a Google search on Indians that inhabited the particular town, county, and/or state, which will bring up their tribal names that you can further research online outside the search engine to find the original names, since the colonizers anglicized many indigenous tribal names. When you find this information, do your research from the colonizers' university websites about what stories were told, what threats were our ancestors faced with, how our ancestors' traditions and land harmed, how did they resist. Then read the treaties. All of this will show you that we did not give away our land, which is what the colonizers called ceded. C-E-D-E-D. Meaning, gave away millions of acres in a treaty when our ancestors didn't have the word acres in their indigenous language. The United States colonizers, and their rival European colonizers, stole it through treaties, based on deceit and fraud. just like they did in Africa, Australia, India, etc. Look. Listen good. Our ancestors had to put an X mark on the colonizers' treaty contract paperwork because they could not read or write foreign English, French, Spanish, etc. This means the treaty contract is not valid. Repeat. Not valid. Our ancestors could not comprehend the meaning of foreign English, French, Spanish language meanings, or expressions etc. of the treaty contract. This means the treaty contract is not valid. Again, not valid. The colonizers' treaty contracts were made under threat, duress, and coercion. Duress or coercion refers to a situation whereby someone performs an act as a result of violence, threat, or other pressure against the one being forced to sign, such as physical duress and duress by improper threat, and/or trickery, like under intoxication. Another term the colonizers used in those fraud land giveaway treaties is capitulation, meaning the making of terms of surrender, a yielding to an enemy upon stipulated terms. It also means head, chief, chieftain, as in the root kaput, to surrender or cut off the head. Question. Aren't foreign colonizers known all across Mother Earth to force Aboriginal Indigenous people to surrender their lands to him? Answer. Hell. Yes. Question. What is an enemy? Answer. 1. Hateful toward and intent on harming someone. Question. Who surrenders his land to an enemy, and he or she does not understand, read, or write what is being said by the enemy colonizer that wrote the document? Obviously the contract stipulations are in the enemy colonizer's favor, and the detriment to the unawares Indigenous Aborigine, unless he or she is being threatened to do so. Our ancestors were absolutely under unbearable amounts of threat and the colonizers were taking their lives. Thus, the X mark on those treaty contract papers were marked under threat, duress, and coercion. For numberous reasons aside from what was mentioned. None. Absolutely none. Of those treaty contracts are valid. We will go over treaties in another part of this series. Ask any questions in the comments section, we will answer as best as we can. If we can't answer the question, we will let you know, or direct you to where an answer might be found.
Sisters and brothers, before we close this part 2 chapter of the series, Yakoki, Omechpi Salachiki, thank you so much for watching our video, and yes, we will be seeing you again later. But please take a few minutes out of your time for just a few more words. The time for talking only was done yesterday. We know who we are. That is, we know that we're not Negroes, blacks, colored people, Indians, yellow people, red people, and so on and so forth. So why do we keep repeating what we already know? That's like stunted growth, like saying or staying in the 4th grade for the rest of our lives. So let's act on what we already know. As a very vital piece of knowledge, all treaties with the European colonizers are indeed not valid. They're null and void. The colonists used their art of deception and the operators of their foreign European Roman Curia and Vatican papal law. And their law is, this is the definition of law. This is their law. It's ordinances and rules prescribed by authority in their own land, not our land. These foreign criminals deliberately planned and carried out that plan to this day to steal, kill, and destroy indigenous lives of peoples and places, take our lands, and take our identities far, far away from their own homeland. Our indigenous ancestors lacked the knowledge of the colonizers' foreign rules that they called law for themselves. So all these contracts derived from the original or initial crimes against Aboriginal Indigenous people worldwide were never valid. They're all null and void, meaning they weren't valid at the time they're putting them X marks on it. But to put into terms in the doctrine of their own, the colonizers' own making, all of these treaties, contracts, constitutions, trusts, all of these contracts are fruit of the poisonous tree. Even our ancestor, Atsitsata, the colonizers called Old Tassel or Corn Tassel of the Talaji, that the colonizers called the Cherokee Nation, affirmed in his 1777 talk with the United States colonizers. Remember what he told them, quote, "You marched into our towns, they were left to your mercy. You killed a few scattered and defenseless individuals, spread fire and desolation wherever you pleased, and returned again to your own settlements. Were we to inquire by what law or authority you set up a claim? I answer, none. Your laws extend not into our country, nor ever did. You talk of the law of nature and the law of nations, and they are both against you. Indeed, much has been advanced on the want of what you term civilization among the Talaji, and many proposals have been made to us to adopt your laws, your religion, your manners, and your customs. But we confess we do not yet see the propriety or practicability of such a reformation." End quote. Sisters and brothers, I leave you with words of liberty in our indigenous Choctaw tongue. Yuka Kucha, liberated. Yuka Kucha, liberated. Yuka Kiyu, free, not bound. Liberty. Yuka Kiyu, free, not bound. Liberty. Yuka Kiatara, freeborn. I love you, Mother Earth.